I drove to the lawyer's office that morning to sign the divorce papers, and I remember thinking the hardest part was already behind me. It wasn't. I had spent the last 8 months convincing myself that leaving my husband was the right thing to do, that the marriage had simply run its course, that people grow apart, that these things happen, that I would be fine. I had packed up my feelings into neat little boxes and taped them shut the way you do when you're trying to survive rather than feel. And when the receptionist at my lawyer's office called to say the papers were ready, I felt something close to relief. Just one signature and it would be done. My husband and I had been together for 7 years, married for 4. We met the way a lot of people meet, through mutual friends at a birthday party in a cramped apartment in Vancouver's east side, both of us reaching for the same sleeve of paper cups at the exact same moment. He laughed, I laughed, and I thought, this is a good sign. His name was Ethan. Tall, sandy-haired, the kind of man who seemed perfectly reasonable in every public setting, and became someone entirely different behind closed doors. Not violent, I want to be clear about that. Just cold. The kind of cold that creeps in slowly, like a draft under a door you keep meaning to fix. By year 3 of our marriage, I had stopped having friends over because I never knew which version of him would be home. By year 4, I had stopped calling my younger sister back because every time she asked how things were going, I couldn't find a true answer that didn't make her worry. My younger sister was my closest person in the world, 3 years younger than me, loud where I was quiet, impulsive where I was careful. We had grown up in a small house in Abbotsford, just the 2 of us and our mum after our dad left when I was 9. My sister and I used to share a bedroom with a cracked window that let in cold air every winter, and we'd pile both our duvets on top of each other and talk until one of us fell asleep. I loved her completely. Which is why, when I finally found out what she had done, it felt like the floor had been removed from under me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because on the morning I drove to sign my divorce papers, I didn't know any of that yet. I parked on Granville Street and sat in my car for a few minutes, watching the rain streak down the windshield. March in Vancouver. The rain was so fine it was almost invisible, just this gray weight pressing down on everything. I texted my mum to say I was about to go in. She sent back a heart emoji and then, "You've got this, sweetheart." I put my phone in my bag and went inside. The firm was on the 4th floor of a glass building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. The receptionist, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses, told me my lawyer was running about 10 minutes behind and asked if I'd like water. I said yes, mostly to have something to do with my hands. I had been working with my lawyer, Ms. Okafor, sharp and methodical, the kind of woman who looked at a legal document the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, for the better part of 6 months. She had helped me negotiate what felt like a fair settlement given what I thought we had. A jointly owned condo in Burnaby that was mostly Ethan's in terms of the down payment, a shared car we'd bought 3 years ago, and the small business I had built and run almost entirely on my own. That business was the thing I was most proud of in my life. I had started it 6 years ago, right after I finished my veterinary technician training. It was a mobile pet care and rehabilitation service. I'd go to clients' homes, work with post-surgery animals, do physical therapy for senior dogs, palliative care visits for cats in their final months. I named it Clover Care. It was a corny name, maybe, but I'd chosen it because clovers supposedly bring luck, and I had built the whole thing on the hope that one day it would let me work for myself, answering to no one. Over the years, I had built a client list of over 200 households across Metro Vancouver. I'd hired 2 part-time vet techs. I'd developed a proprietary intake and care protocol that my clients raved about. A detailed, personalized system I'd spent years refining, combining physiotherapy benchmarks with home-based enrichment planning for each individual animal. When I started the divorce process, Ethan's lawyer had argued that Clover Care was a marital asset because Ethan had occasionally helped me with invoicing and taxes during our marriage. Ms. Okafor had pushed back hard, and in the end we'd agreed on a buyout figure. I would pay Ethan a lump sum, and Clover Care would be entirely mine. The number was painful but manageable. I had spent weeks saving, borrowing conservatively against a line of credit, doing the math over and over. So that morning, sitting in the waiting area with my paper cup of water, I was anxious but ready. I had done everything right. Miss Okafor came to get me herself, rather than sending the receptionist. I noticed she was moving a little differently than usual, more deliberate, like she was choosing each step. Her expression was careful in a way that made my chest tighten. Nora, she said, which was my name. She said it the way you say someone's name when you're about to tell them something complicated. Come on back. I followed her down the hall to her office. She closed the door behind us. She sat down. She folded her hands on her desk. Before we get to the papers, she said, something came up this morning that I need to tell you about. There's been a development with Clover Care. I said, what kind of development? She told me to sit down. I was already sitting. I gripped the armrests of the chair. She told me that earlier that morning, her office had received a courier package from a company called Meridian Health Group, a private veterinary services conglomerate based in Calgary that had been expanding aggressively across Western Canada over the last few years. Inside the package was a legal notice, along with supporting documents. Meridian Health Group, the documents explained, had recently completed due diligence on the acquisition of an independent mobile veterinary care protocol, a proprietary intake and care system, which they had agreed to purchase from a registered operator for $240,000. The sale had been completed 6 weeks ago. The protocol had been integrated into their onboarding systems for 3 of their new BC locations. The operator they had purchased it from was listed as Ethan Calloway Reid, my husband, my almost ex-husband. I remember the exact second that sentence landed. I felt it in my teeth. I had been running Clover Care for 6 years. I had built that protocol from nothing. From handwritten notes after long days, from conversations with physiotherapists and animal behaviorists, from trial and error and client feedback over hundreds of cases. I had never licensed it, never sold it, never agreed to transfer it to anyone. It was mine. It was entirely, specifically, inarguably mine, and Ethan had sold it. Ms. Okafor was watching me with the quiet attention of someone who has seen people receive bad news before, and knows to let the first few seconds pass before speaking. How? I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected. That's what we're going to find out, she said. But Nora, there's more. She placed 2 documents on the desk in front of me. The first was the purchase agreement that Ethan had submitted to Meridian. It was a professionally formatted contract, notarized, with what appeared to be 2 signatures at the bottom, his and mine. I stared at my signature. It was a good copy, not perfect, but close enough that I couldn't immediately say, looking at it cold, that it was wrong. I didn't sign that, I said. I know, she said, and we can prove it. But that's not the part I want you to look at. She placed the second document beside the first. It was a bank wire confirmation. Meridian Health Group had transferred $240,000 into a bank account. The account number was mine. Not a joint account. Not a business account. My personal checking account, the one I'd opened as a student and never changed, the one where my paychecks went, and where my line of credit was attached. $240,000 had been sitting in my account for 6 weeks. Ms. Okafor said, it appears that when Ethan submitted the sale documents to Meridian, he provided them with your actual banking details rather than his own. Whether that was deliberate or an error, I can't say yet. But Meridian wired the funds directly to you, and since the account belongs solely to you, he has been unable to access it. I opened my banking app with shaking hands. I never checked my account more than twice a month. I had autopay set up for everything, and I generally avoided looking at numbers that made me anxious. I had assumed there was maybe $4,000 in there, maybe a little more. There were $243,612 in my account. The room felt like it was breathing. The next several weeks were some of the most disorienting of my life. Ms. Okafor filed a fraud complaint with the Vancouver Police Department on my behalf and contacted Meridian Health Group's legal team directly. She also brought in a forensic document examiner to analyze the purchase agreement. Ethan, it turned out, had made several miscalculations. The first was the signature. The forensic examiner confirmed within 2 weeks that my signature on the purchase agreement was a forgery. The pen pressure was wrong, and more importantly, the document had been signed with a stylus, which left a different kind of trace than a pen. A small detail, but it held. The second miscalculation was the bank account. He had intended Ms. Okafor's contact at the police told us later to provide Meridian with a joint account that he'd kept from an earlier period of our marriage. But that account had been closed as part of the divorce proceedings. The only account number he had on file for me was my personal one, which he'd had access to long enough to memorize in the years we were together. And because that account was solely in my name, Once the money arrived, he couldn't touch it. He had forged my signature to steal something from me, provided my real bank account as the destination, and then watched the money land somewhere he couldn't reach. The third miscalculation was Meridian itself. When Ms. Okafor contacted them, their legal team was initially defensive. But once she sent over the forensic report and a timeline of my documented ownership of the Clover Care Protocol, client files going back 6 years, dated internal documents, emails between me and my employees, they shifted very quickly. Meridian's lawyers were not interested in being party to a fraud. They issued a formal statement acknowledging that the sale had been conducted without the verified authorization of the rightful owner. They agreed to renegotiate. 3 months after I sat in that waiting room, gripping a paper cup of water, I signed a legitimate licensing agreement with Meridian Health Group. They wanted the protocol. They had already integrated it and seen results in their pilot locations. Their offer, this time negotiated properly and in my name, was not $240,000. It was $650,000 paid over 3 years, with royalties on usage across each new location they opened. There was also the matter of the original wire transfer. Since the funds had arrived in my account as part of a fraudulent transaction, the legal situation was complex. But Ms. Okafor had argued successfully that since I was the rightful owner of the asset and the funds had been directed to my account, there was no legal basis to compel me to return them. Meridian did not contest this. The $240,000 stayed. I sat at Okafor's office the afternoon we finalized the licensing agreement and I cried. Not from happiness exactly, but from the specific relief of a thing being over, of something that had been held in suspension finally landing. She handed me a box of tissues and said, "You built something real, that's why this worked." I didn't tell her the thing I was thinking, which was that I hadn't known I'd built something real. That I'd spent years thinking Clover Care was too small, too niche, too specific to matter in any big way. That I'd believed Ethan when he casually mentioned, more than once over the years of our marriage, that it was more of a side project than a real business, that I should probably think about doing something more stable. That mobile pet care probably had a ceiling. I'd believed him. And in believing him, I'd let him convince me that the thing I'd built wasn't worth protecting. He was wrong. As for Ethan, he was charged with fraud over $5,000 under the Criminal Code of Canada, forgery and uttering a forged document. His lawyer tried to argue that he had believed he had a right to the property as a marital asset, which was creative. The judge was not moved. He was convicted on the fraud and forgery charges and sentenced to 18 months. He served 11. I didn't go to the sentencing. I didn't need to. Now here's the part I haven't said yet. About a month after the Meridian situation came to light, when I was in the thick of the legal process and barely sleeping and eating toast over my kitchen sink for dinner, my younger sister came to visit me. She showed up on a Sunday afternoon with groceries. The specific groceries I liked, which she had memorized without me ever noticing, because that's the kind of person she had always been. She made pasta while I sat at my kitchen table and talked at her, and she listened and nodded, and at some point she said very quietly, "I need to tell you something." I looked at her, was staring at the pasta. She told me that 4 months before I filed for divorce, Ethan had come to her for help. He'd told her he was planning to register the Clover Care Protocol as his own intellectual property and sell it. He said I had agreed. He said we were planning to split the proceeds and use it toward the divorce settlement. He said it was all above board and he just needed one thing. He needed a witness to help him practice the signature, because he wanted the paperwork to look clean. My sister had said no. She'd said no immediately, on the spot, and told him she wanted nothing to do with it. She'd also, and this was the part where she couldn't look at me, not told me. She hadn't told me because she'd hoped it would come to nothing. Because she was scared of the confrontation. Because she had convinced herself that maybe she'd misunderstood. She put a bowl of pasta in front of me and sat down across from me and said, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I should have told you." I looked at her for a long time. I thought about all the conversations I'd avoided with her over the last 2 years of my marriage. All the phone calls I hadn't returned because I couldn't find a true answer to "How are things going?" I thought about how much I had missed her, even when she was right there. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I didn't want to be the one to blow up your life." "My life was already blown up," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." She cried. "I didn't, not then. I think I had run out of tears for that particular season, but I reached across the table and took her hand, and we sat there for a while like that. She became a witness for the prosecution. Her testimony was part of what established that Ethan had premeditated the forgery, that he had actively sought out an accomplice and refused, and had proceeded anyway. Her account of that conversation in Miss Okafor's notes went into the fraud file. It wasn't her fault. I know that. She made the wrong call in a moment of fear, and then she came and told me the truth when it mattered. I'm not naive enough to think that's nothing. I know what telling me cost her. We talk every Sunday now. She drives up from Abbotsford and we walk my 2 dogs. A shepherd mix named Hawthorne and a 14-year-old beagle named Fig who walks like he's got somewhere to be, along the seawall in New Westminster. We don't always talk about anything important. Sometimes we just walk. The dogs have become almost famous among my clients since the licensing deal. I posted one photo of Fig looking extremely unimpressed outside the Meridian satellite office in Richmond. I had gone to do a site visit and he'd come along, and my clients absolutely lost their minds over it. I don't fully understand social media, but apparently Fig has something. Clover Care is still running. I promoted one of my vet techs to a supervisory role and took on a 3rd part-time employee. I moved out of the Burnaby condo and rented a house in New Westminster, with a yard big enough for Hawthorne to run in. I bought a proper couch instead of the one Ethan and I had picked together at a liquidation sale in 2019 that I had never actually liked. Small things, but they're mine. I think about the version of me who drove to that lawyer's office in the rain, convinced the hardest part was behind her. She was wrong, but not in the way she feared. The hard part wasn't the signing. The hard part was learning that the thing she had quietly, carefully, painstakingly built, the thing she'd been talked into thinking was small, had been worth fighting for all along. I didn't fight for it, technically. The fraud fell apart on its own, the way badly constructed things tend to do, but I showed up. I sat in the chair. I didn't look away from the documents even when my hands were shaking. And Fig, for what it's worth, napped through the entire discovery process on my office floor and woke up only when the good news came in. I like to think that was intentional.